Introducing the Bible, Part 3. Major stages in Bible translation. Stage 1. Transliteration. One of the early stages in Bible translation is called transliteration. Transliteration is converting the original letters or characters into the letters or characters of a different writing system. For example, Greek letters to English letters. At this point, the text below is still in the original language, but the text has been transliterated. Here is Matthew 4, 8 and 9 transliterated. Now, I have not learned to pronounce Koine Greek, so I'm not going to read the Greek, but you can see the text below. Stage 2. Equivalency. An important stage after transliteration is called equivalency. Equivalency is assigning an equal meaning to the text as was present in the original language. Generally speaking, there are two approaches for formulating equivalency. Number 1, formal equivalency, and number 2, dynamic equivalency. Formal equivalency seeks to maintain, as much as possible, a word-for-word translation. Dynamic equivalency seeks to maintain a thought-for-thought translation. Here is the main distinction between the two. A thought-for-thought translation includes a little more interpretive input from the translators. This is often very helpful and accurate, but this approach can carry with it a slightly higher potential for misrepresenting the original meaning. It is important to recognize, however, that both approaches involve interpretation. One approach places the emphasis on capturing the words of the author, formal equivalency, while the other emphasizes capturing the thoughts of the author, dynamic equivalency. The benefit of a dynamic approach is flexibility with language, which can encourage greater readability. An example of this would be the NIV, the New International Version, as compared with the NASB, the New American Standard Bible. Many contemporary readers will find the NIV, a dynamic equivalency, to be a more readable translation than the NASB, a formal equivalency. But many readers will simply prefer the Bible they are most familiar with. And so, let's apply these two approaches to a passage of Scripture. Here is a very literal rendering of Matthew 4, 8 and 9. Again, takes along him, the devil, into mountain high unusually, and shows to him all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them, and said to him, These to you all I shall give, if ever, having fallen down, you should do an act of worship to me. Now, here is a formal equivalency rendering from the New American Standard Bible, the NASB. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain, and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, All these things I will give you, if you fall down and worship me. Now, here is a dynamic equivalency rendering from the New International Version, the NIV. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. All this I will give you, he said, if you bow down and worship me. Now, this particular passage, Matthew 4, 8 and 9, doesn't sharply illustrate the distinction between the formal and dynamic renderings. But there often isn't a sharp contrast between the two styles. We see that the dynamic rendering uses the word splendor instead of the more literal rendering, glory. And instead of using the more literal phrase, said to him, the dynamic equivalency simply uses the phrase, he said. Lastly, instead of using the literal phrase, fall down and worship me, the dynamic rendering has bow down and worship me. Note that even the formal equivalency departs from the more literal phrase, do an act of worship to me, instead using the phrase, worship me. Okay, now let's look at a few contemporary examples of the kinds of Bibles we've been talking about. Formal equivalency Bibles. The New King James Version, NKJV. The New American Standard Bible, NASB. The English Standard Version, the ESV. Dynamic Equivalency Bibles. The New International Version, the NIV. The New Living Translation, the NLT. My personal favorite is the NIV, and I choose the NIV over the NLT because the NIV has less interpretive input from the translators. But again, the extra interpretive input can be very helpful. Paraphrased Bibles. The New International Reader's Version, the NIRV. The Message Bible, MSG. The Living Bible, the TLB. And just a quick comment on paraphrased Bibles. Paraphrased Bibles do a lot more interpretive work for the reader. And these are especially helpful for beginning-level readers. We would do well to remember that paraphrased Bibles are not technically translations of the Bible, but they are interpretations of the Bible. As with any literary work, the more distant we are from the original language, the easier it is to misinterpret the meaning of the original author. This is why original language studies have remained an important aspect of biblical study. And finally, let's look at some language resources. BibleHub.com. That's my personal favorite. BibleGateway.com. And StudyLight.org. In the fourth and final resource in this series, called Introducing the Bible, we'll be looking at Bible interpretation.